He is known as the great sufferer, the great tolerator, the great endurer. When someone we know withstands great stress or trial or pain, we say he has the patience of Job. "Why me, Lord?" asked Job. "And why Job?" asked the rest of us. His story is not, as we might expect, simply a meditation on enduring pain. It's also a meditation on enduring doubt through faith in God.
You can never accuse Job of being hypocritical. You can accuse him of a lot of things, but he wasn't being hypocritical. And the message I get is that God can take just about anything. He can take anger, he can take abuse, he can take someone actually wrestling with him in person. The one thing that he can't take is a fake, because then he can't deal with a real person. He's dealing with a fake person, and God cannot deal with that kind of person.
I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you attack me. Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. The churning inside me never stops. Job 30.
When I look at a book like Job, I remember a quote from William Safire, who used to be a speechwriter for presidents, and he wrote a book on Job called The First Dissident. And he said, "I began my study of the book of Job having doubt in my faith, but I came out of the book of Job having faith in my doubt."
Eventually, Job is joined by a less aggressive questioner, a younger man named Elihu, who has been quiet until now, out of deference to his elders, he says. But Elihu still presses the same argument, which God will correct in the end, that Job is being punished for his sins.
A lot of people, when they're relating to God, it seems that they have the idea, I need to find out what kind of face God wants to see on me and somehow come up with that face. But that's not the message I see in the Bible at all. God doesn't want to see a face. He wants to see inside. He wants to see the real person. And all of Job's friends were telling him, Job, you need to act more faithful. You need to be more devout. You need to show God more respect. And Job is saying, I don't feel respect toward a God that treats me like this. I feel ticked off. I feel disappointed. I feel betrayed. And so he expressed that betrayal while his friends are just shaking their heads. Job, I can't believe you're saying these things. At the end of the book, God says, I respected Job because his outside was the same as his inside. He didn't try to hide something from me. He just expressed who he really was.
Remarkably, God anticipates our questions and even provides our doubts for us in advance.
I dare you to find an argument in Bertrand Russell or Voltaire or Hume that isn't already contained in the book of Job, in the book of Psalms, in the book of Habakkuk, in the book of Jeremiah.
Does it please you to oppress me, to spurn the work of your hands while you smile on the schemes of the wicked? Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as a mortal sees? Are your days like those of a mortal, or your years like those of a man, that you must search out my faults and probe after my sin, though you know that I am not guilty, and that no one can rescue me from your hand? Job 10.
By the end of the book, Job has not only seen it all, he's heard it all. Yet he's maintained his faith, asking only one thing, that God speak to him in person and explain himself. And in the magnificent speech that closes the book of Job, God's longest speech in the Bible, Job gets his wish. As one commentator puts it, God doesn't explain, he explodes. Job is restored, and his knowledgeable friends must do penance.
My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Job 42.
I honor a God who gives us so much freedom to make our own decision about him that he actually includes in advance the arguments against him, that people will use. I honor that kind of God. He's not twisting my arm, forcing me to believe in him. He's simply saying, this is the way life is. And in Job's case, of course, life included that time of questioning and doubt. God didn't scold him, punish him for that. He said, I like that. This man was honest with me.
The bottom line, God dislikes a fake, and he cares very much how we respond to our distress.
There was never a time in Job's life when God cared more about him, was more interested in Job's response, because the way that the book pictures it, God is looking down, and there are evil forces who are saying, he's going to give up, he's not going to trust you, he doesn't love you, he only loves the good things you give him. And God says, no, I think my servant Job loves me just because of who I am. But there was a test going on, and we don't know the answer to that test until the very end. But at the very end, you can see pleasure in God. It's like the pleasure of a parent when a child finally comes through and says, I do love you. I do want to stay in your family. Even though I've got these complaints against the way it's run, I love you. I want to stick with you. That's the kind of pleasure that God felt when he looked back on Job's life.
The lessons of Job? That we need faith most precisely when it seems impossible. That God cares more about our faith than our pleasure. And most importantly, perhaps, that how we respond matters. By hanging on to the thinnest thread of faith, Job won a crucial victory in God's plan to redeem the earth.
What I have found is that people who read the book of Job, there are parts of that emotional journey that are just going to reach out and grab them. This is where I am right now. That's exactly how I feel. There are other parts that are just going to kind of puzzle them, and they say, I'm not there. I've met people who are there, but I'll just tuck that away. But when a Job-like circumstance happens to you, I guarantee you that someone has been there before you, and that's the old man Job. Because he was honest, because he was so eloquent, he's like a pioneer. He's gone ahead of us. So if you wonder, should I really feel that? Should I really say that to God? You can relax and say, well, yeah, that's okay. Because Job already did. You can just follow his words because God included them in his own Bible.
It's a simple book to read, as the Old Testament goes. The great valedictory speech of a remarkable man named Moses. It's a poignant history of all that's gone before and a warning of all that's to come. In the hands of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy are the past, present, and future of the Jews and the keys to their promised land.
If I had to summarize his message in this whole book, it would be a surprising message, and that is, when things are really going well, that's when you're in danger. Look out. Watch out. When things are not going so well, I'm not going to worry about you because I know you'll turn to God. You'll scramble for help. It's when you get your own land, when the crops are working, when the bank accounts are growing, when the army is strong, that's when I worry about you spiritually. Because you'll start believing your own press releases, you'll start taking credit for your own successes, and somewhere along the way, you'll just forget God. To me, Deuteronomy is a beautiful, fleshed out example of the way history was taught. It's really only been in relatively recent times that anyone has made their living as a historian, trying to research and record exactly what happened. For most of history, for most of the time human beings have been alive, history was taught around a campfire, in a song, in a poem. And we have some of those poems about Ulysses, some of the great characters of history. They're oral poems. They're given in such a way that the next generation can memorize them and repeat them. And in fact, in the book of Deuteronomy, there's a scene at the very end where Moses makes the children of Israel learn their history. It's a song he teaches them called the Song of Moses. And as they march into this promised land, they sing this song. And the song is really a history lesson. They didn't have a textbook. They didn't even have a Bible. They had no written words, but they did have the knowledge. The knowledge was inside their heads, and they were singing it. And as they were singing it, of course, the children were hearing it and learning it.
Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Your elders, and they will explain to you. Deuteronomy 32.
At the threshold of the Promised Land, after a very long journey, a tired, exasperated, and somewhat grumpy Moses speaks.